some strings in some way or the other.
Thank you, Suleiman, and assalamu alaikum to everybody listening. So as Rise Mzansi, our position has always been that our country is not a poor country. It is a country that is poorly led and poorly managed. We are led by the most unethical, unscrupulous amongst us, and often incapable amongst us. And unfortunately, that has eroded people's confidence in leadership as a whole. And so we believe primarily that the citizens should be, actually politicians should be accountable primarily to the citizens, not to their parties, not to their donors, not to anybody else. And so as Rise Mzansi, one of the first things we did in setting about our policy was not to sit in a room and come up with it or ask anyone who wasn't part of the roadshow. We went on a People's Manifesto process where we consulted thousands of South Africans, and we came up with a manifesto that was fully representative of the needs and desires of South Africans. And then, obviously, because political parties need resources, we then continued to go around and find anyone and everyone who was willing to support us. We have received donations of 99,000 Rand, many of those, by the way. We have received a number of donations in smaller increments, as well as a few donations from high net worth individuals who've been able to make larger contributions. Our policy remains our policy and has been published and available for all to see since we launched more than a year ago. So I think what people should really be applauding us for is our transparency, and that's really a big focus for us.
Ruben, how does your party propose to have the provincial government sharpen oversight on the troubled municipalities in Gauteng, which is the wealthiest province of the country and the economic heartland?
Thank you so much. Greetings to everyone. I think it's important to understand and know that as a provincial government, if we need to get this province running correctly, we need to work with our municipalities. What often tends to happen is that we normally foresee that the provincial government uses the muscle to be a political muscle over the municipalities instead of supporting them in a proper manner. So what needs to happen is that some of the functions that are performed at provincial level must be strengthened at a municipal level. So issues of safety, we have seen within the current government trying to build a structure within the provincial government when the structure is well served when it's at the municipalities. So these are things that you start to need to engage with for the municipalities to be able to perform what needs to be done. Also, you have to assist the municipalities because that is where called phase of service delivery. So when dealing with appointments, you have to get the right people. So skills audits becomes critical in those environments. So it's one thing that you must assist these municipalities so that you don't have municipalities like in Mfuleni with keep on struggling. You don't have other municipalities where you see there's problems of qualification with municipal managers and things like that. So it's very important to work with them.
Thank you. All right, so we'll move now to our analysts. Each analyst will choose one party's answer to critique and comment on. They also have 90 seconds, so we're keeping them to time as well. And then once we're done, we'll give you a 30-second response if you want to respond to whatever the analyst said. Kanita, you can go first.
Thank you very much, Shukran, Maulana. And I would like to just start with the ANC. All of the achievements over 30 years. When you go to residents in Tembisa or Soweto, wherever you've been campaigning, how can you justify the decline in the last 5 years? Because there is a substantial feeling that things are worse, South Africans' lives are worse today than they were 5 years ago, or even 8 years ago. And how do you reconcile that? Because the metrics are showing the same thing. People are poorer, people are hungrier, the infrastructure is worse. And so, taking away personality politics from this, what can be the true justification to South Africans that, yes, we had 15 years of growth in the first 15 years of democracy, but we've had recession, but more so in a place like Gauteng, how has your life actually
you look at City of Tshwane, the ANC has not been in running that municipality for almost 2 full terms now. In the city of Joburg, it's in a coalition, the ANC is in a coalition now, and has not been. In the city of Ekurhuleni, the same. I think our response to what has been people's lived reality is that one is, yes, we do believe that coalitions don't work. They are unstable. We've been able to, it has been demonstrated across, not only here in Gauteng, but even across the world and in other municipalities in South Africa. Secondly, is that a lot of externalities also affect our own economic realities. So conflicts in the Middle East, Russia, Ukraine, the fact that COVID did do a big damage to our economy. And part of that is to recover. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Is to recover. Thanks.
Thank you. Now, Munisa?
I have a very basic question that I want to ask. And I'll throw it to you.
Let's do this.
Tasneem, yeah. Mogale City runs raw sewage into rivers, contaminates underground water for the entire province. And you are telling us that the ANC has changed a lot of things in the last 2 years, for example. If we cannot get this kind of basic, because the issue here is that we are so swamped by huge issues in this country. And these kinds of things that actually affect the quality of people's lives sort of like fall by the wayside. If we can have a city pumping raw sewage into the rivers of this province, what can we get right? And how can we trust that the ANC can resolve these issues, both these issues, but also other large issues on the agenda?
So our approach in the province is to really provide support to municipalities where municipalities are failing to do what they are for various reasons. So you speak about Mogale City. The fact is that Mogale City is a financially unviable municipality on its own. And outside of national and provincial support, financial support, you're not going to be able to respond to those. So through the systems of government and legal frameworks, we have entered into agreements with Rand Water on behalf of municipalities to be able to respond to, not only in the West Rand, but also in the Vaal, restore the Vaal water treatment plants, et cetera, because municipalities are not going to be able to do that
Time.
on their own.
Angela, your question?
So my question would be to the other 3 parties, to the Democratic Alliance. You say coalitions will bring improvement. The people of Johannesburg have certainly not had that experience. And part of your construction of coalition seems to be about governance agreements. But many people in these coalitions, if the parties don't have the same policies, how are you going to marry those policies to come up with one policy so it isn't just a division between executive positions at provincial or at national level, which then does not result in in policy coherence across different departments? To Rise Mzansi, absolutely aspiration is important, but you've already run into the aspiration versus reality problem of saying political parties need resources. Well, what happens when you sit in spaces where you need resources and the people who are providing you with those resources, he who pays the piper calls the tune. It's one thing when you haven't been tested so they can give you money. Once you're in a seat in a municipality, in a legislature, in provincial level, in a legislature at national level, their demands might shift very differently. And to Action SA, you talk about skills audits, you talk about the technical solutions, but there are often also political problems that need to be resolved. So in addition to these skills audits, how would you engage the political challenges that any government will have to have in a country with the inequality, social distances, social inequalities, spatial inequalities of South Africa, in addition to the other things that you want to do to fix municipalities, fix provincial procurement processes, and fix corruption?
You can go first.
So I think we've seen, Angelo, particularly in Scandinavia, that we've seen coalitions work. And where we've seen them work also now in South Africa is when the parties that are in the coalition have a clear set of policies that are alike and a clear set of principles that are alike. One of the reasons why we can't, for example, be in a coalition with the PA, and we've been attacked for not being in a coalition with the PA, is that they don't bring any principles or values to the table. And if a party does not bring principle or values to the table, they say, here are my principles. If you don't like them, I also I have others for someone else. So in order for coalitions to work, we need to agree on a basic set of principles. Either it's the rule of law, either a market economy, and that's why you have particular parties in the MPC, and it's not a free-for-all. We, for example, will never have a coalition with the EFF. I can say it here, because we are diametrically opposed. So once parties agree on principles, they'll be able to govern better. If they don't have principles that are aligned, then we're going to have a problem.
Yeah, so Angela, fortunately, we've already been faced with the scenario you paint out. It's not hypothetical, it has happened. And we have already turned away and walked away from a lot of money. People talk a lot about the 15 million. They don't talk about the 100 million, circa 100 million that we've had to forfeit because of standing on our principles and not being willing to bend to the will of people who wanted to influence our policy. So as I said, those who donate to us in the full knowledge of what we stand for. And if they don't agree with what we stand for, they fund other parties. And as we can see, there are a number of funders in the South African political party funding space who choose not to fund us, simply because we will not acquiesce to things that we do not believe in. And I think we have already proven that and said it repeatedly on a number of platforms.
Thank you. Ruben?
Thank you so much. I think one other issue that affects these issues around the political aspect is the corruption that we've allowed to really surface in these municipalities. And you find someone moving from one place to another around these municipalities. So we need to really hold people to account and ensure that those people that are found to have faltered and they are taken to task, they are taken right to prosecution until they get into jail. And we also have to assist in protecting whistleblowers, because this is another area where you find that you can't have people coming up and reporting poor corruption issues or reporting things that are not going right, because whistleblowers are not protected. And probably another thing that we need to look at is the budget allocations, because also what tends to happen, you know, the budgets are not allocated correctly, and that is why some of these things are not delivered properly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you to all our participants. That was the first of 5 areas. I think it was a good start. Now, we move on to healthcare, staying with Tasneem, right? Many say that one of the biggest electioneering tactics that the president pulled off was the fanfare around the signing of the NHI a couple of days ago. He lost his pen for a couple of months, then he miraculously found it. But anyway, many organizations and NGOs have indicated that they're going to court to challenge the NHI. Some opposition parties have said it will become the new ESCOM for the looters. And others have said that it will be many years before it can become a reality. My question to you, Tasneem, is why will it work in Gauteng, and how will you make it work effectively in the short term rather than the long term?
Thanks so much. So essentially, NHI is about pooling government resources, state resources, into one to be able to respond to the healthcare. We have, so Gauteng was selected, Tshwane in Gauteng was selected as a pilot for the NHI project. What did that entail? It entailed building infrastructure for primary healthcare, which is there. Secondly, is to also devolve from hospitals to primary healthcare certain types of health services, and that is already ongoing. And then certain clinics and health facilities were selected, again in the pilot, to be 24-hour health, and then of course there's the standards. So even prior to NHI being an act, our institutions are readying themselves to be able to implement it. And I think because Gauteng houses or services the most of the population in relation to healthcare, we have to be ready even prior. But I do agree it will take time for its perfect implementation to finalize. Those that take government to court can, but our democratic...
The NHI.
So, the focus is universal access. And what does universal access mean? It means that we all have a right to access a public health facility, no matter what the cost is, if you don't have means at no cost to you, and to get reasonable, high quality healthcare. That's all it means. So we support universal healthcare as the DA, and I want to say that without any fear of contradiction. Our view is that improve the public health system. The South African Medical Association, which is an institution of doctors, also rejected the NHI, because what the NHI is basically pulling a lot of public funds, including additional taxes to all of us in this room, back to the hands of a public health system that has proven itself to be inefficient. This public health system that took the life of Papita Dokra, and may her soul rest in peace, you can see it through the Tembisa Hospital, a hospital where children were bought 1,000 rands worth of jeans for a child. So the problem with the public system is corruption, and it's poor management. Manage the public system better. You'll have hospitals like Rotiskir that we have in the Western Cape. Ensure that there's the right ratio of doctors. Our ratio of doctors, I think, is 0.7 to every 10,000 people, where it's 2.3 in nations like Brazil, which are peer nations. I'm not even comparing us to the United States. So we can improve this public health system by ensuring that the funds are properly managed and that everyone can access a health facility near them, and that the public health system gets to a similar level as the private healthcare system without additional taxes and without tinkering with the working system in the private area.
Thank you. Vuiswa, we know that unfortunately we've had disasters here in Gauteng when it comes to healthcare, like Life Isitimeni. What's your party's plan to prevent such disasters?
So, I mean, I think one of the key things that we can't overlook is the issue of management and leadership within the public healthcare system. And I say this, I mean, I give an example of the former CEO of Rahima Musa Hospital, who was fired following a damning report by the health ombuds and an investigation that took about a year. And what was found was that it was the style of leadership and the fact that the hospital itself was not being managed properly, which led to a number of the crises. So my point is that we need to ensure that we have, one, the best people in positions of leadership, but number two, we also need to ensure that we have enough primary healthcare facilities close to where people live. And this is why it is our view that the focus should be on ensuring that we are able to capacitate local community clinics and deliver public health care, especially primary health care, adequately within a 15-minute distance of where people live. That will help us to unburden, the tertiary healthcare system and the hospitals the few hospitals that we have. Of course, we need to build more. Of course, we need to have universal healthcare. But our focus should really be on primary healthcare and health management, which includes mental health, for the record. And I think that's something that's often very overlooked. Substance abuse and addiction support services are also something that is heavily overlooked in our communities. And so our focus is really on investing in primary health care close to where people live.
Ruben, understaffing and staffing challenges at public hospitals and clinics is a major issue. What's your plan? I mean, as Action SA, are you willing to reconsider your much criticized policy on foreign nationals and perhaps look to employing foreign nationals as medical professionals to deal with this challenge?
Yeah, no, thank you. We clear on our stand that we stand for legal immigration, so that is not even a debate for us which we can even get into. But one thing that is critical is that we need to get the basics right. When we were running the state of Johannesburg in that years when Emin Mashaba was the mayor, basic stuff of increasing the hours of working clinics, which is key, because it doesn't overburden the systems. It allows even the residents to be able to attend clinics at a space where it's manageable. But the moment you don't do those things. And another thing is also, the colleagues have touched on it, the issues of corruption. I think we underscore this issue of corruption in the country. It has really damaged the basics of running hospitals. We put people that are not competent to deal with the work, allow wrong procurements in these spaces. So if we deal with management in most of the times, we do able to get things right. We can't have situations where you have doctors that are struggling with employment and who must go around, they must strike. before they get jobs when we need so much healthcare. That is why we are saying that you can want to bandage, bring an NHI in the system, but if you have not solved what is there, it should not be a debate. It must be an obvious choice for everyone in the country to go to a public institution because it's well run, it's attended by the politicians, it's attended by people who have got money. But because the system is not geared in that particular manner, that is why these things are not happening the right way.
All right. Kanita and Angelo are going to ask questions in this round. If time permits, we will also allow nominations.
The assessment that is a joint healthcare is for Gauteng healthcare.
I'm not sure which part of declaring that we have a leadership crisis is idealistic. In fact, I think it's the most pragmatic thing. We're not promising moon and stars. We very much recognize the fact that this is not going to be a first 100 days in job. What we need to do is do a full and proper audit, number one, of the skills and the leadership that we have. Number two, we need to, one by one, deal with every single individual who has been proven to be corrupt or who has been proven to demonstrate poor leadership. There is no shortcut, unfortunately. I know we're in the business of wanting silver bullets, but they don't exist. And the slow, hard slog of rebuilding our country means not just being in executive leadership, but also doing the hard work of being in the legislature and holding those in the executive accountable on a daily basis. Some of our biggest corruption scandals have been brought to the fore by parties that had 2 seats and were able to ask the right questions and hold the executives accountable.
Thank you. Is it?
Yeah, for the DAs, I'm really stealing the mic here, but
No, it's fine.
yeah, but to say that, this consistent thing that we do it better in the Western Cape.
Because we do.
You don't,
The
actually.
situation,
We do.
objectively, what makes Groote Schuur better is not the Democratic Alliance.
Yes.
I'm not sure where you are, Kanita, but I know, Groote Schuur is a potential hospital, so yes. But health is managed at a provincial level. No,
reference
so-
Groote Schuur
yeah,
better
so-
than a Gauteng hospital, but I want to say it's not DA policies, it's the doctors that work there.
And then the doctors that work out in other hospitals, I think that the key that I said here, it's the management and the leadership of the MECs and the direction that they give. It's not just Groote Schuur, it's the health system is better. No one lives less than 5 kilometers from a health facility in the Western Cape. We spend more of our money on health. We said, and you can Google it now as you speak, and people can Google it now as you speak. There are many reports that are not written by the DA that show that we have the best services, and it's undisputed. I'm not sure why we're disputing it. What needs to change is culture. So culture is really what needs to change. The ANC has systematically hollowed out the state. It's much more sinister than we think. From DGs to simple mid-managers, we have ANC cadres in the whole system. This system will never work until we absolutely professionalize it again. We have a very deprofessionalized state in this country, and its worst manifestation is in healthcare, where people die because of a deprofessionalized state, and that's the first thing we need to sort out.
Mboniso, you wanted to come in there?
Yes, half of my family is in the Western Cape. My maternal family is in the Western Cape. A lot of people from my village in the Eastern Cape are in the Western Cape. And the health system works in some parts of the Western Cape. You're not going to tell me now that the healthcare, even primary healthcare, works in Kayedicha in the same way that it works in Newlands. This is from lived experience. We can even check actual reports written by academics. And I don't know why the DA has problems in admitting that you are weak in some parts of the Western Cape. There's raw sewage running into the streets of Site B, and that's got nothing to do with whether the ANC is providing services or not. You are responsible. You've been in leadership in the Western Cape for a very long time. So you ought to own both the successes and the problems.
So I don't have a problem with that. I think one of the things we really need to think about is how do we position these discussions? First of all, there are more people immigrating from the Eastern Cape to the Western Cape because they've got better chances of finding a job. There are more people that arrive this country illegally that go to the same Western Cape that we talk about. Part of the challenge that we have is this urban migration in this country because of the neglect of the economies in the rural parts of this country. And what happens, and it happens also in Alex, it doesn't have to be a DA place, it also happens in Durban. So what happens is that there's an overpopulation next to these cities because this is where the economic concentration is. And now we're saying that there's sewage running. There is a lot of informal settlement that just come out of nowhere all the time. And we must have an honest conversation about this because people believe this is the only place where I can go find a job is Cape Town. I'm going to go put up a check anywhere there. And then we have an analyst that comes and say, we're not providing services there. Is it happening in Alex? Is it happening anywhere else? We have a big migration problem. And that is the undercurrent that creates other levels of problem. And we must not look at it at one level. As a tool to punch someone else. Let's have a discussion around how these things.
But I think that's a valid point. That the same argument could be made for Gauteng in terms of migration. Worse, yeah.
100%. Then that's a common problem we have. But the point that I'm making is that there is almost a vicious cycle where these things happen. They happen. So an economy that doesn't work in rural areas creates urban migration. Urban migration creates informal settlement.
Can I just interrupt
They create
you?
the services problem.
Right, Angelo, yes.
No, let me finish. They create the services problem. And then you end up in a situation where people claim that there's a service for some people and not. There is a formal areas and there are informal areas. This is a problem that everyone has.
Okay, time.
Can say. And we must be honest about it.
Angelo?
So we must say goodbye to this intellectually morbid and moribund idea that urbanization is a problem. Let us remember that there was a prevention of the majority of people who lived in this country for more than a century from urbanizing. Why would we, 30 years into post-apartheid South Africa, continue to suggest that urbanization is somehow a problem? People have the right to move. Across the planet, people have been urbanizing for the last century. The majority of people 15 years ago on the planet were city and town dwellers. Why in South Africa do political parties insist some people must remain rural while they remain urban as politicians in cities? This is unacceptable. This idea that migration is a problem is actually intellectually corrupt. There is no substance to it. The reason South Africans move to towns is because for 3 to 4 generations, they were prevented from living in towns and actively pushed back onto rural spaces, which became surplus people. Entire books, academic studies were written about this in entire disciplines in our 35 universities for 40 years. To continue to pretend that this is somehow a new problem and that it has no historical history is unacceptable. So that's my first line. My second line, and this is to all the parties, is I'm hearing a lot of focus on corruption. And I want to go back to something Jabulo Ndebele said in the mid-2000s. He says, we keep focusing on the next corrupt person. So we just gather in all the corrupt people and we somehow deal with them. We never ask what makes corruptibility possible. So you can go through the processes of trying people, you can have a far more effective system of charging people, policing, investigating. That doesn't deal with what makes corruptibility possible. So my question to all political parties is, how are you imagining beyond all of this talk about leadership, changing people at the top, changing managers, how are you reimagining systems to prevent corruptibility rather than just getting rid of corrupt people? Because if the systems currently in place allow for corruptibility, what differences will you imagine, are you planning to prevent more corruptibility as opposed to a new group of people who will become corrupt?
All right. So, Steve, we'll start with you. 30 seconds each to respond to Angelo, right?
So our take on that is also what we've started doing in the province is those systems that are easily open to corruption, to automate them. Because if you have less human interaction, you also prevent, and those have got, the systems are automated, they are time bound, they are easily viewable from both the client and the person who's supposed to be doing the work. And so there's a lot of processes, especially in provincial government, that we are starting to automate, and it's bearing fruits. What people used to say, pay for this to get this done, it's not possible because you are able to track your own process, it's time bound, and you know at what stage and who's responsible for doing what.
I think I want to take the opportunity that what builds economies is building new cities and you can look at the Chinese example. They will show you that over the last 30 years, the building of new cities, there are areas in China that were nothing 30 years ago that are completely new cities that people have moved to. That is a successful economy today, and I want to say that. The second thing is that we have a very good legislative framework in South Africa. We've got a very powerful office called the Auditor General's Office. And that office gives you indication of exactly how each and every rand must be spent. We have a municipal financial framework. So we have the right laws. What we need to do is parties that have accountability. Parties where if you have done something wrong, you will be removed. Historically, we've done that. I don't think there's anyone that's corrupt or there's ever been corrupt in the DA that we've not removed. So the culture is an issue. The culture in your organization, it will eat your leadership for lunch or breakfast or what they say. The culture is what matters.
Breakfast.
Yes.
Breakfast. Very
Yeah, so this is very important. For us, it's equally about prosecuting and ensuring that there are actually consequences when people are found to be guilty or involved in corrupt activities. But it's also about removing the possibility of corruption taking place. So we have proposed, for example, to have a fully digital, fully transparent public procurement process, whereby any citizen should be able to see and track any a government tender that has gone out and be able to see who got it, what was the original quote price, what was the final price, etc., etc. It's also about providing enhanced protections for whistleblowers, because often the people who are implicated or involved in corrupt activities are known, and in many instances they are even identified and named, but
Right.
whistleblowers are victimized and often financially excluded. So it's about ensuring that we have robust protection for whistleblowers.
Robert?
Yeah, some of the points the colleagues have touched, I'll just add on one of those things. It is important to have consequences. I think what we are faced with in this government is that there's lack of consequences. Companies are doing work that's not supposed to be done, and there's an official involved. This company is not blacklisted. People are not dealt with throughout the process until the prosecution is key. You go to other countries, you're Singapore, they to make example of individuals. So you have to start doing it here. We have seen it, and we were struggling in the city when we were still running the city of Johannesburg, because these things, when we were doing them, you find these same employees in other departments. And it can't continue like that. And that's why we still have this problem. Because they move from one place, they go to another. But if we do it correctly, blacklist, and really get them jailed, it will start to change things.
All right. Kaneta and Angelo, anything further before we move on?
Fine, happy to
All right.
move
So we move on now to the third of the 5 areas that we're going to be covering this evening, and that is safety and security. Esteemed Amapanyaza,
Sure.
if the DA-led coalition is going to be in power after 29th of May, I don't know how they're going to call him Masinga or anyway,
Amaramokopa.
these crime prevention wardens, there's been much criticism that it was rushed. It was more of a political tactic than anything else. What's the plan for safety and security going forward in Gauteng? Will such initiatives feature if you're still in power?
Yes, for us it's 3 things. One is the increase of funding to the community safety entire ecosystem. Secondly is to increase human resources, and across the board, so specialized crime intelligence, police, and yes, the nickname Abapanyaza. And third is a collaboration with the private sector through the use of and using technology. So if you don't roll out and extend and expand the use of technology to assist you to fight crime, we are not going to get to the top of the crime in our province. So that is what we've done. We'll definitely continue doing it. And I think over the past few weeks, there has been demonstrable successes of collaboration between the private sector, how they use technology, the increased human resources, as well as how the Amapanyaza fit into that ecosystem. Because essentially, they also form part of your real grassroots level intelligence. And that is a very key aspect in fighting crime. Criminals are known, and they are known in communities because they don't live somewhere in the cloud. They are our neighbors, but our sense of not being able to police ourselves in community has been lost over time, and that's what we're bringing back.
Thank you. Pagiso, many have made the point, and it's a point that perhaps doesn't get adequate attention, that policing or law enforcement alone cannot result in safety and security. You need morality at ground level. You need values. What's the DA's plan in that regard, in terms of moral regeneration and re-establishing core values at societal level in that quest for greater safety and security?
So we're a liberal party, which means that we believe that people are free to practice whatever systems of how they view life, which God do they pray to, and what values do they live with, as long as to the extent that it doesn't harm the next person, nor does it create greater social harm. So what is required, for one, is that back in terms of, for us, the production of crime is not necessarily, maybe moral generation is a core problem, but it's a problem of creating a society in which people are unable to look after themselves. And in lieu of that, finding other ways that are criminal to do that. So you need to solve three problems. One, you need to solve the education problem, where South Africa produces some of the worst educated learners that can't read at grade 4, can't read and write for meaning, which is a terrible tragedy. Second is that a lot of the learners are dropouts. We always publish the real pass rate every year, showing the inflated ANC pass rate, that half of learners actually drop out from grade 1. Where do they end up, by the way? They're on the streets. So you need to first solve the economic problem, having solved the education problem, and we'll get to that later. And then also you need to now a targeted community intervention. Police must be localized. As is best practice all over the world, police is localized to cities and to provinces. You need to run policing efficiently. You will never run policing efficiently with a convoluted management system that sits in Pretoria. It needs to sit within every province and within every competent city. But to solve the economic and education problem, you will start seeing less and less
Thank
crime.
you. Vuyiswa, what creative solutions does Rise Mzansi have for crime problems? Be it petty crime, opportunistic crime, violent crime, organized crime, syndicate corruption?
Yeah. So I think our approach really looks at 4 pillars. One, addressing the root causes of crime. So actually just dealing with some of the socioeconomic challenges, ensuring that there's adequate community development facilities and places for young people to occupy themselves. One of the biggest issues that are facing young people in our communities right now is drug abuse and drug addiction. And of course, a big part of that is people selling the drugs in communities and having no consequences for that. But number 2, it's actually the fact that young people are not working, and so they're available and susceptible to such. Number 2 is investing in community safety, and so partnering with community safety and patrollers. We've seen examples of success where this has worked. Alexandra Police Station has gone from being a red category police station to a green category police station in a space of 12 months because of the impact of community patrollers who are voluntary and are community members, and they get no support from government. Number 3, capacitate and professionalize the SAPs. Very important. And the last one, pick up the phone. We have a number called 10111 that currently registers 1.2 million dropped calls. I think most of us, if you were in an actual crisis, that's probably the last number you would call. So we need to make it possible for people to actually report crimes and be confident that those crimes are the dockets are not going to be lost, that they're going to be documented properly, they're not going to be lost, and that the crime will actually make it through to prosecution. At this stage, of course, we're the crime capital of the world because our system has so many loopholes and pitfalls wherein criminals can actually get off scot-free.
All right. Ruben, your manifesto talks about dealing with illegal guns, right? But what's your view as a party on a gun-free society, as many are advocating for? And the second part of the question is about private security. There are those who are advocating for greater partnership with private security, and there are others who are saying that we need to move away from reliance on private security.
Yeah, I think...
Just speak a little closer to the mic here.
I think as we travel around this province in particular, you see a lot of security companies coming up, and it tells us of the failure of the state to work to deal with the issues of crime. When the residents themselves, they are of the view that they must take these things upon themselves. So we need to work together. It's important, you have to work together because crime happens everywhere. So you need all eyes. So you need to find partnerships with local companies that you can work with. So that is a given. So it can't be taken away. And the issues of gun as well, they get lost where? From the police station. A gun that is illegal gun, it was also a legal gun at some point. So these are issues when you're talking of resources in these facilities, proper training in certain instances, that how are these things kept in those facilities so that they are really not found easily. And if you can't just imagine in this country where you go in and rob a police station, it just tells us that we've got a serious problem that needs to be corrected in terms of equipping our law enforcement to be able to withstand some of these things. And as well, it's very important, the issues of infrastructure, because some of these things that contribute to crime, you go to around these places, you find other places are pitch dark. You know, when you ask yourself that at night, how then do you deal with issues of fighting this criminality in these areas? And we've got places that we know that are crime-ridden places,
Right.
but we don't focus on dealing with those.
Are you for a gun-free society, or you only got an issue with illegal guns?
Look, we want society to protect themselves. So, and we've got a constitution that allows people to really exercise their right if they feel threatened. So we cannot take that right away from people.
So Nomaniso and Kanita will be asking or making questions or making comments. Nomaniso, we'll start with you first this time.
We could start where you ended.
Speak into the mic.
Yes, we could start where you ended with Ruben Masango. You know, it's fine to say that people have a right to protect themselves. But what we don't often see in these conversations, and what I would like you to comment on, is the extent to which those privately owned guns feature, particularly in gender-based violence and femicide in the private spaces, where abuse takes place, and often those guns are deployed. Because in this conversation, what has not come through is the way in which the crime that we talk about outside is also inside. You know, listening to all the political parties on this, as a South African woman, I am concerned because dealing with crime also interacts with other things, with transport, with all these things. People are not safe in taxis, they're not safe in their own households. So, and quite a lot of this doesn't come through in any of the manifestos, so we need to talk about that. We need to talk about the fact that the places, the informal settlements that you're complaining about in Cape Town, in the Western Cape or anywhere else, for example, are not serviced. And I'm not talking about servicing within 3 months of informal settlements coming up. When I talk about Rosswich, I talk about places that have been there for years, but they are not serviced. The other side of the absence of those services, Tasnim, is the fact that these become centers of crime when a woman has to go to the toilet at night and leave her home and walk some distance. A lot of stuff happens, that people are raped, children are, and all these things. And somehow these experiences that are very tangible for South African women and children are absent when we talk about crime.
Ruben, you want to go first?
Thank you. I think, like we say most often, that the problems of this country, of course, we might be focusing on one area, but they are multifaceted. There is no way you look at one aspect of the crime at the exclusion of the other. We talk of specialized courts. We need those kind of things. You can't go to even the police station. It took for long, and you didn't understand why, when this country has so much gender violence. When you go to a police station, a woman is not treated well. You get there and they tell you, go and sort it at home. People get restraining orders and still no action is being taken. So these are the things that we were saying that they must be looked at holistically. But as we focus and said, like your substance abuse, because some of this gender-based violence is a result of substance abuse in many homes, in many instances. So these are all things that must be looked at. The social ills, we need to look at and deal with this issue of crime.
The steam to reply as well.
Yes, you know, what I find interesting is that they need to be looked at holistically, but you don't. And you are a party that is standing to run the country. You're saying we must vote for you, not just to be in opposition. You aspire to run the country, and yet you don't bring the holistic vision that you say we should have.
We would love to have a whole hour to unpack some of our
No, you don't have
policies
it in your
because
manifesto, so you can't have it in
is
an
there.
hour here.
I've got a policy document, I'll share it with you. I've got a policy, it talks clearly about gender-based violence, how we're going to deal with it. Please get a copy of it, it's detailed in here. Here's it here.
Okay.
Thank you.
You want anybody else to respond, Minister? Disney?
Okay.
Yeah.
So thanks so much. So one, I vehemently disagree with the fact, or with the point made by the member from Action SA that GBV is as a result of substance abuse or intoxication. Having worked with, having had family members who have been victims of gender-based violence, there's something beyond just whether you're intoxicated and then you get home, you beat your wife up. I think that's not as simplistic as it is. But our approach to increasing human resources is in a way to be able to respond to where communities feel unsafe. So the patrollers, the wardens, the amapanyaza, whatever you want to call them, they do, so for instance, in the Muslim community, very early in the morning you go to mosque when it's still dark. They accompany them to mosque, as an example. That is a way of creating safety, making them feel safe, etc. But police visibility goes a long way towards making communities feel and really be safe.
You good with that, no, Minister?
Yeah.
DA or Raisam Zanzi want to chip in on what Nombaniso has raised?
Look, I was probably nodding vigorously because, in fact, you took the words right out of my mouth. There is an intersection between infrastructure and municipal infrastructure, such as lighting, but also one of the ways when we engage with communities and women in particular, and you ask them, what would make you feel safer? They talk about things like just cutting the grass, the long grass in the fields that they have to walk through, because that is where many experience the threat of rape, or children actually get killed and left in those grassy areas. So there is a definite intersection between infrastructure and violence against women. And I'm coming back actually to the issue of alcohol abuse. It is undeniable that there is a correlation between gender-based violence and alcohol abuse. It is not binary. It doesn't mean it's one or the other, but it is undeniable. We saw, even during COVID, there was a visible reduction in violent crime when we were not allowed to consume alcohol. And this was reported by hospital staff themselves. So we cannot discount the fact that alcohol is one of the many root causes, but it is not the main cause. There are obviously socioeconomic factors that result in us having this unhealthy relationship with alcohol.
Yeah, I think what Nomboriso speaks about is what I spoke about earlier about a systematic hollowing out of state capacity. We have a very good progressive tax system, and the idea of the progressive tax system is that the rich will pay more taxes than the poor, but the taxes are meant to primarily look after the poor. Meaning that if I'm not some well-heeled person in Sentin, primarily I rely on the state for things like the Nomboriso mentioned, services. Now, if the state is unable to and is corrupt, I'm going to experience that failure in many facets. I experience it in education. I experience it with having access to a proper policing system. I experiencing it in not having access to job. So it's this whole vicious cycle of a poorly managed state that does not provide services that creates all of these levels of problems that we need to resolve by fixing the ability of the state to take care of its citizens, starting with things like simple services and going to things like policing.
Angela?
Yeah, mine is just a kind of the imagination that I hear from parties of what security means and what safety means, what crime is violent poor people, right? And I have a concern around that imagination of crime because it lets off white-collar criminals, part of the corruption that came up in previous questions. But my important question is, government's function is to regulate, and that includes regulating the private sector. How do the different parties imagine you will regulate the security industry, which has more than 10 times the number of personnel in this country than the actual South African police services. How do you have any intention of regulating the security industry beyond they must only hire certain people? How do you make sure that security doesn't become privatized for the wealthy and that creates insecurity for the majority?
For Tasneem?
All of
Oh, okay, Tasneem, you
Anybody.
can start.
Thanks
Let's just
so
keep it
much.
30 seconds each, right?
Yes, thanks so much. So regulating the private sector across the board, whether it doesn't matter, is something that we are very adamant about. Also with a lot of pushback from the private sector because for obvious reasons. But our stance is that the private sector has a role to play, but state authority must always remain. So that disjuncture between having more capacity in the private sector. Our partnership with the private sector is to expand what they have as resource to places where they ordinarily on their own would not. And I think we've demonstrated private companies now work in areas where they were not serviced or they would not service them for reasons of their own, but regulating.
Can I come in here
Yeah,
on
sure.
the fact that private securities are protecting police stations? That is how absurd it has become.
So I think also the aspect of instilling community policing has always been a policy of the ANC. So
But this
we
is
speak
state
about
inefficiency. That's the police stations are scared of criminals, so they get private security in.
So I think that's, for me, I think that is the inability of people who are trained to do their work, not doing their work over a period of time. It's not about that all of a sudden they became scared. You've been trained to do work, do that work. And
But-
how do we reinforce that becomes very important. Retrain and continue to train, but also like state authority and confidence in state institutions must be reinstilled so that you do have that situation where somebody who's trained to do work
All right.
does do that work.
Minister, you wanted to come in?
But Tasneem, with all due respect, it's very difficult to take the ANC seriously on this because the kind of situation that we have now, where private security industry is probably more armed than the public security that has occurred under the ANC, has been allowed by the ANC. Your party made it possible for roads to be blocked. And for introduction, I think in suburbia, of some kind of soft apartheid about who walks where and who doesn't walk where. So if in the last 30 years, you have in fact, because if you look at the first manifesto of the ANC and the vision, it envisaged a completely transformed police service, right? And moving away from militarization to more community engagement and all that. And all of that no longer exists, and you are telling us that you're going to fix it now after allowing it for 30 years.
So I think one of the biggest challenges that we've had as the ANC, and I think we speak about it always, is that our own system, policy, democracy, call it what you want, has allowed for the private sector and the state to play side by side in services that ordinarily should be provided by the state alone. Secondly is that we have also said that, you have the right to protect yourself. What does that mean in practical terms? Some people say that it means we live in a gated community. I think the third aspect is the fact that over a long period of time, communities have not been active in everything that they're supposed to, that we want and try to encourage community activism constantly. And that has always been a policy and a position of the ANC. Democratize every space in society and get communities involved in everything that revolves around your life.
Coming back to Angela's question, Pogiso.
Yeah, I think it's a reflection of the extent at which policing has decayed in this country. To that point, to say that even private security have to protect police. Our approach is three-pronged. The first approach, as we said, was devolve police to the lowest level possible so that they can be efficiently managed. The second,
By municipalities.
By provinces. The second is what we call a whole of society approach. So reviving those community policing forums and involving the private securities, community leaders in helping people ensure that they take care of the communities that they live in, and they work side by side with police to ensure that criminals are found and that things are investigated and we protect ourselves. Private policing on its own is not a problem, but it should not usurp the authority of the state. The state is still the ultimate security authority, and we should operate with that principle. Anything else should fall under that.
We are currently victims of privatization by incompetence. If we had a fully functioning police service and we could feel safe in our country, then we wouldn't have private security. So I think the conversation about regulating or not regulating is a bit misplaced. The reality is that we are sitting ducks and potential victims of all manner of crimes in our homes. And this is at all levels of society. It's not a middle class problem. It's everybody's problem. And we have a police system that has failed us. So we have to recapacitate our police. We have to recapacitate the state as a whole. You know, it even speaks to healthcare. Nobody wants to pay medical aid, but we are forced to do so because we don't have a public healthcare system that is able to cater to everybody at the level at which we deserve. So we need to have a fully functional state, and ours would be to recapacitate the state to perform its duty.
Ruben?
Yes, definitely we cannot outsource policing. We need to do it. So that is why you can hear in my presentation that I now and again refer back to what we're able to do. One thing that Herman Mashaba, when he took over the South Jones, he hired 1,500 police officers. And no one in this room can deny that you will feel the presence of JMPD during that period of time. There were so many much of raids that were done, which is the one thing that the Metro Police were doing. And you'll see the change. So it's all about what we are saying, equipping the right people, training them, giving them the necessary support. And you see the change that is required to be delivered by the law, our law enforcement. But because we've allowed the state to outsource many things and not perform their duties because of lack of incompetence, like we're all mentioning here, it has created where we are now.
All right. Angela, you good?
I'm good.
Ganitha?
I'm fine.
All right. Okay, so moving on now from safety and security, we move to the fourth of the 5 categories, and that is the economy. Sneem, BEE and cadre deployment. Are you ready to drop it now?
Okay, so there's a notion that every employee in the state is a member of the ANC. It's not true. That's not true. It's a fact. And this perception that every employee in government is a member of the ANC somewhere, I mean, it's not true. Secondly, BEE is essential for transformation. We come from a history where on the basis of your skin color, you were excluded from participating in the economy at any level, whether meaningfully or at a basic level. So, but what has happened with the BEE over time is that it has been corrupted by the same people who are responsible to meet those requirements of BEE. And by and large, they are big business. So they comply on paper. I mean, we've heard lots of horror stories. Everybody knows about them. Somebody signs documents and they are a shareholder on paper. They don't even know about it. And that company then qualifies for BEE. But BEE, no, we're not going to drop it. It's about how do you improve and how do you really, for its intended purpose, get the results. Without BEE, we would not have some of the transformation that we see, especially in the private sector, whether it's at a management level, blacks, females being able to participate at that level. BEE is not just about businesses that can do business with the state. It's much larger than that. It's much broader, and its intended purpose is still required.
Just very quickly, you spoke about the role of big business, right? But what about the aspect of BEE that made a select group of black individuals very rich at the expense of many others? What's the plan, or how do you plan to fix that very quickly?
So, like I said, it's about how it has been it has been bastardized, for lack of a better word, by those who were meant to use BEE for real transformation. So definitely there were individuals, black individuals, who were offered stakes in businesses, made very wealthy over a period of time. And that was not the intention of the policy. What are we going to do about it? So and many businesses do fight and argue about it's cumbersome to report, but it's necessary. So the real detail and being able to demonstrate real transformation across not only ownership, and I think that's the biggest challenge, that people thought BE was about ownership. It's about how you spend your money, how you procure as a business, employ, ownership, management, all of those.
Okay, so we know that we live in the most unequal country in the world. What's the plans the DA has to ensure that economic policies at provincial level are linked to employment and wealth redistribution?
I just want to say about BE is that we have a president of the ANC who's a billionaire, but he's never risked a rand in his life to make another rand. He's never risked 1 rand to make 2 rands. And that's BE. That is exactly what it is.
You don't really know that.
And so what we need to do, things like poverty and inequality do not need a proxy. You don't need race as a proxy for poverty. The majority of poor people in this country are black, probably around 99%. So what we need to do is to go deal with poverty on its own. So our alternative to BE is that you link something simple like public procurement, a very powerful tool. The state spends almost R1 trillion a year, very powerful tool. You link that to what we call the Sustainable Development Goals, meaning that in place of empowering ANC-led parties, you empower businesses that work with the state to help eradicate poverty, to help improve education. That actually in the criteria that is in the 17 SDGs.
It's loud, it's large and big. It's not specific. How do you translate that to a South African context of inequality?
It's very direct. It has specific targets. All you need to do is to make the target to South Africa. Make South African targets. It says, for example, half poverty. We say we want to lift 6 million people out of poverty. That's in our manifesto.
So how are you going to do that? How are you going to give a department a target? You're going to say remove half the people in. How are you? You have to have BE policies because BE policies are targets. That's all it is.
No, you have to have numbers. You don't have to have race to it.
So what is the poverty
so my
line?
point?
So can I just ask, what is the poverty indicator? What is the line below which people qualify as poor in your party's gaze?
The food poverty line, I think it's about probably 1,200, and we said that we need we also say that we need to increase the grants, by the way, to the food poverty line.
But remove the minimum wage.
But that's something else. But now we're arguing 2 things at the same time.
But I'm saying that's
let me finish the one, and then I'm happy to discuss that. So okay, here's my simple point. Within the SDGs, there are targets. The targets are numerical. We're going to link public procurement, which has been a powerful tool of government to eradicate poverty, that have used incorrectly to enrich this party.
All right. Very quickly on,
we're going to, so
on
let's
the minimum wage.
You want to discuss the minimum wage, Kanta? Let's go there. So in terms of the minimum wage, we are giving an option to opt out of it. You don't have to take
to be poor.
It's an option to opt out of the minimum wage.
To be poor.
Especially for young people. What do you mean to be poor?
Because the minimum wage is just above the poverty line. So you say, okay, choose poverty.
The alternative, we're choosing 42% unemployed people. What are they choosing? They have no choices.
Can I just
They have no choices. So what are you choosing between nothing and a minimum wage?
No, Municipal?
We're saying that you opt out of that if you want to. If you don't want to, then it's fine.
Yeah.
Sit at home and wait for the minimum wage and not get it.
Understood.
You people hire gardeners here and they say, I can give you 200. Some of us people have gardeners. My point is that the minimum wage regulation stays, but you can opt out of it if you want. If you don't want, then it's fine.
Okay. Nobody, so you want to come in?
You know, there's quite a lot that you have said that is like deeply shocking. You know, firstly, race is not a proxy in terms of BE and all that. You also admit that most of the people who are poor in this country are black. So if you remove race, you're going to remain with what? You understand? So I don't understand this extra sensitivity to actually mentioning race when you yourself in the same breath admit that more black people are poor. This is the function of the history of this country. That's number one. So if you are saying you are not going to recognize race, you take out race, so how do you have targets then? Because in any industry, at any level, you have to have targets in order to be able to measure that. And that's what BE should have been. So we could put aside the fact that it became a corrupted system. And it doesn't necessarily mean that in and of itself it is wrong. Secondly, this issue about opt-out of minimum wage, I actually find it to be the most callous thing that the DA could have ever said. You agree, you say the poverty line is what? 1,200. So if people want jobs, if whatever the poverty line is, if people want to have jobs, then they can opt into jobs that are below poverty line. If cheap labor was ever going to be successful in this country, it would have been already. This is a country that is found on cheap labor, on enslaved labor.
All right.
If it had any positive impact on people's lives, it would have done so, right? So I think that what people want to know from the DA actually is not this attitude that, you take it or leave it, because that's what you're saying. You're saying, well, it's better than not having bread, than not having jobs. You can have a half a loaf of bread. Obviously, it's better than having nothing, but you can have a quarter of bread that is stale and moldy, and what you are selling as a DA is a stale and moldy. And the worst part of it is that you put it as if it's an option, as if it's your choice. It's your choice. You can take it or leave it. I'm sorry, I've kind of lost my objectivity on this one.
Two points that Nominee have raised. If you can.
Yeah, hopefully I'll have as much time as he has. let's deal with the race proxy. So if I say 99% of the people in this country who are poor are black, and you deal with poverty in the definition of poverty with the food poverty line, who do you have empowered? The same black people. If you put it as a race legislation, you are allowing me now, or allowing a creation of another Motsebe or another Sodi who's black but not poor to also come in and benefit from that system. We're saying that you deal with poverty, you deal with the issue of black people. That's all we're saying. Maybe we're not being listened to, maybe we're not delivering it correctly. I am saying to you, we want to deal with poverty. And the poverty will be the poverty majority of black people. I want to leave it there. On the issue of wages, I think we know there's an economy we respect, which is the Chinese economy, and I don't think we study it. We don't really study it. How it started was that in terms of manufacturing, it's very powerful in manufacturing. Manufacturing, the Chinese urbanized, they built new cities, but wages were at a very low level. Once they started dominating manufacturing, starting to exporting, over time they are increasing the levels of wages as the standard of living increases in China. These are basic economics. These are basic economics. We are sitting with 42% unemployment because of the socialist thinking that happens here. We are saying that you need to create a system whereby you are able to produce at the lowest cost over time. Once you become a net exporter to this continent that is so much need of manufacturing, we now import everything from China. We do. And what is happening there? The standard of life is increasing. What's happening here is going the other direction.
All
we
right.
need to face these facts.
Okay, thank you.
You're going all over the place, though. If we take the Chinese example, are we okay?
I'm ready for
It's okay.
All right, Vuyiswa, corruption in government when it comes to procurement for provincial projects. What's the plan from Rise Mzansi in dealing with that?
Yeah, so I think I did allude to this in my previous response, which was really about reducing the ability for corruption to happen. But let me double click. The bulk actually of corruption that happens and leakage from a public procurement perspective happens in the under 500,000 Rand bracket
Absolutely.
of corruption. It's actually not the big stuff that we hear about on the news. People's bread and butter is under 500K. And that's because there are minimal checks and balances in that particular segment. So it's actually about closing that gap first and making it more difficult, reducing that threshold from 500K, make it 50K if we have to. But as I said, ensure that the system through which procurement is happening is fully transparent and that we can actually hold the relevant people to account. Those who are signing off on various invoices or at various stages of the process must be seen and must be visible to all of us. And I think transparency is a big part of it. But obviously on the big contracts and all of those, and I did mention, the issue of whistleblowers and whistleblower protection is really major, because as Tasneem said, not everybody who works in the state is implicated. Not everyone is a member of any political party. There are a number of good people in the public service who are unfortunately in a system that is rotten. Some of them get driven out, some of them leave of their own accord, but it's really important that we retain the best people by protecting them and creating an environment where they can report without fear of persecution.
Ruben, in your manifesto, you talk about relaxing labor laws to make it easier to fire non-performing workers. How then will you guard against exploitation?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's unfortunate some things are taken out of how they are portrayed to be. Because we are in a country where these are the same things where we've allowed unions to take over, and where you find, as we speak now, there's a lot of strikes happening. Pick it up is on the streets, the abuse of employees with these labor laws that are there. So in the main, we can't have this top dress approach. We need to go to the detail and see what is the problem. What aspect of this labor law? I'm a labor law specialist myself. But the frustration that there's employees with this labor laws, you go to the CCMA, you get an award, the employer doesn't take you back. But we then say, no, let's allow the labor laws to continue. You go to a disciplinary process where the employer doesn't even give you the necessary information to be able to defend your case. And these labor laws must not be changed. The disciplinary codes that are out there, and things must not be changed. So there's a lot of these things, probably maybe like what Pogo said, sometimes when you express these things, we don't express it in the correct manner, but these labor laws have contributed drastically to where we are. Factories close because fails of negotiations, because they stand on a particular point. And when you go back and check, the investment that these unions have, it's unbelievable. And this investment do not benefit the members. So a lot of things have to be changed. We need a reset in this country to get things right.
Right.
If we continue like this and compare ourselves to the current government and want to perpetuate what the current government is doing, we are not going other way as the country.
Okay.
We need bold step and change these things that are not working.
Angela, do you want to go first?
So my question, I've heard examples in other questions, other answers to questions. Singapore was mentioned, China has been mentioned, Sweden was mentioned, the United States was mentioned as what we're not going to compare ourselves to. In terms of the economy, if you had to choose a country to imagine what you think South Africa should and could be like under your governance, what would that be? And the reason I ask this, and you can respond to it in a bit, is Singapore has 5 million people, South Africa has 60. China has a hideous record of human rights violations that led to that economic growth, and there is major instability in the west of China. We need to be careful that we don't have contradictory statements, because again, to go back to Njabulo Ndebele, who warned us in the 1980s against sloganeering politics, it's wonderful to say people should urbanize, they just shouldn't move to Cape Town. It's wonderful to say we should suspend labor laws because unions are taken over, when in fact there are fewer unionized workers in South Africa than 30 years ago.
Absolutely.
So we need to think very carefully about what we mean, because unions themselves have been co-opted into a neoliberal corporate culture of investment and not necessarily on workers' rights. So will the abolishing of those laws necessarily empower ordinary workers? It's wonderful to say people can opt out of a minimum wage. People are already opting out of a minimum wage. In everyday life, they have to do work of the least dignity for the least money on a private go-to-go basis. You stop at any private space on the edges of our cities, you can pick up a worker for 50 rand a day. Not you. So my question to you is, what is that imagination of this country's economy after 5 years of your governance in this province? What do you see that economy looking like?
All right, 30 seconds each. Ruben, we'll start with you this time.
Yeah, hey, this time is very limited. So you get the basics right. This economy just needs us to get the basics right. You talk of infrastructure. Infrastructure that is not maintained, that is dilapidated. We don't invest properly. So these are things that builds the economy. And you know, I wanted to just to quickly touch on these issues of the union, just to own it again, because when we were in the city of Johannesburg, we were the only mayor when there was Tatema Shaba that was able to strike a memorandum with the unions, and they will let strike during that period, because we understood what when we say these labor laws must talk to what needs to happen. So it's very, very, very important.
Yeah.
There are various sectors in the economy that we need to protect. As a country, we're not protecting them. That is why we have so many issues that we deal with, instead of having allowed ourselves to
All right.
focus and develop certain economies, and then have SMMEs, entrepreneurs playing this in that space. So it's very critical for us to deal with those
Wiswa?
things.
So I think there's no country that compares to South Africa. It's very difficult to find a one-to-one. But I would say that Rise Mzansi, as a social democratic party, has to a large extent modeled itself on many of the Nordic countries, such as your Sweden's, Finland, Iceland, you know, sort of those countries, because they are very robust in terms of social protections. Taxes are also quite high, but people accept that because there are high levels of public trust in the state and the capacity of the state and the reallocation of resources, equitable allocation of resources, and there are also relatively low levels of inequality, which is, I think, is an important attribute for us to pursue. And I just want to make one small point, because I felt robbed of the previous topic. I think it's really important in the conversation around labor rights in our country to acknowledge the fact, and we're really playing dumb if we don't acknowledge the fact that there is an inherent power imbalance between an employer and an employee, particularly a low-wage employee. So the idea that you are going to give somebody the right to negotiate themselves a lower wage is just a misnomer. It's a fact that when somebody is desperate and poor, they will take what they can take.
Right.
And this is what we see a lot happening in lower income segments. And so we need worker rights and
Okay, sir.
robust worker rights.
Your response to Angelo?
Please, you are free to move to Cape Town anytime. but you know that if you do it illegally and you just, the difficulties you create in town planning, which we have. A country, a mix of maybe a bit of India and Germany. India in terms of their education and their dominance of, now the whole world actually now outsources to India. India provides the world's IT, the world's accounting, and the world's software engineering because of very good education. I work in the sector, I understand it. Germany, very strong manufacturing base, and manufacturing is a center of employment. If you want your country to be employment intensive, you need to be in manufacturing. We have a golden opportunity of a continent like Africa that still needs to develop. Who is exporting to the African continent? It should be us. We have two oceans, we've got good ports, we've got good roads. I don't know why we're not doing it, because we're not investing in it. In terms of the minimum wage, remember what we're saying, if the market sets the wage, it can go two ways. It either goes lower than the minimum wage or it goes higher. So how does it go lower and higher? It starts lower, but as the economy keeps growing and then the cost of and the living standards raise, it goes higher. And that's what is happening. So let's not think of it in this one direction that we are thinking of. The other thing that you must remember, we are talking about a 42% unemployment.
Okay.
And those are the choices that people are making.
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, people don't have choices to make at this point.
All right. When the lights went, I thought maybe ESCOM thought elections was today.
No, they're coming for us. They're still coming for us.
The team, your response
June.
to Angelo?
Yes, thank you so much. So I wouldn't want to compare South Africa to any other country. I've been to India and it's not a pleasant place.
No.
So I think the key aspects is for government to respond to the ease of doing business. So the way we treat businesses is whether you're small or big, the regulations are the same. And that needs to, so we do need to look into and take into consideration the size and the type of business, what is fair regulation for a small business that is entering the space as opposed to something that is bigger. We've got to address and respond to, like I said, the ease of doing business and focus on the sectors that are directly contributing to our current economy, supporting them more and expanding them more. Manufacturing, ICT, the financial services sector, business processing, the construction and property sector, as well as tourism and mining,
Yeah.
with all its history, as well as agro-processing. There are also other sectors that are new, and if we focus on it, South Africa can be a leader, especially on the continent.
Okay.
So those like energy, etc. Thanks.
South Africa
Municipal?
in energy.
Just quickly, you know, I find it interesting that when we talk about
Just put
labor
the mic
law,
a little bit closer.
but when we talk about labor law, we talk as if there is no context, there is no history. You know, and when we talk about the need to basically share the pie and make more people work, we think of impoverishing working poor more. None of the parties that are making these suggestions have asked company executives to cut their salaries to subsidize salaries of the poor and ensure that their industries continue. The labor rights in this country have been an integral part of the history of this country and the struggle of this country. When the Weir-Hunt Commission was set up in the 1970s, it was in response to industrial action that was taking place. When negotiations fall apart, as you see in other, we pick it up as in, it's not a South African phenomenon, actually. It's a relationship phenomenon between working people and those who employ them. You have months of stinking New York, you know, and nobody would ever suggest that those workers should not have their fundamental labor rights. So it's not a question, it's a comment. It's probably my last one. I get very, very disappointed with political parties that continue to squeeze working poor. And, you know, and all these things that we put as if they are sexy, opt out of this thing. These are rights that people died for, that people sacrificed. If we are saying they must continue to do so, you are telling a black woman in her 40s that she must be the 5th generation person in her family to be exploited. That's what you're saying. And yet you are saying that the executive wears a Swiss suit office and millions in bonus, that they should continue to do so.
Yeah.
We are never going to undo structural inequality. All these are a manifestation of a fundamental problem in the society, and that problem is structural inequality.
Kanita?
I just want to caution political parties as my final parting shot that this election comes at a time where the South Africa has fundamentally changed, and that's because the liberation dividend has waned, and people are living in a world where they cannot see a brighter tomorrow. And so this idea that we come here with cheap politicking sometimes, and without the understanding that, without that realization that change is going to be minimal, but has to be consistent, number one. And number two, that at the heart of a lot of what we see in South Africa is destructive politics versus that stepping back and actually having a clear vision for what South Africa is. The fact that we are still quabbling about unions when the unions are actually dead. The unions are not that strong. COSATU is the weakest it ever has been in the last 30 years, right? The fact that we're still squabbling around minimum wage when actually we are living in two countries. We're living in a 1% country of extreme economic empowerment, extreme technological empowerment, South Africa being this financial hub, this, you know, for this 1% of its population, or 2% of its population, and then everyone lagging behind. And I think this binaries of corruption or transformation, or and the ANC is guilty of the same. We transform at all costs, but we can be corrupt in the process. So these kind of, I think people, South Africans, are hurtful. And I think that realization on voting day is going to, I think the 5 top political parties, and if I have to make a prediction, Molana, is that this election result is going to be difficult for all the major political parties because they're not fundamentally understanding that South Africans cannot hear more of the same.
Okay. So it's a comment, not a specific question to
Yeah.
anybody. Okay, we now move on in the interest of time to the fifth and final area that we are covering, and that is South Africa in the region and the world. We know that Gauteng is deeply integrated into the region and the continent in terms of economic ties, but also in terms of long-standing social ties for its millions of residents. Tasneem, starting with you again, what's your party's plan on tackling xenophobia and ethno-nationalism? Could you speak into the mic?
Sure. So I guess xenophobia is an incorrect term to use. So xenophobia is the fear of foreign nationals. In the South African context, we don't fear or are anti-foreign nationals that come from Europe, etc. It's about those that come from the African continent. And I think that it also speaks about the structural problems, the history, etc., where we come from, and what we understand as South Africans as what is progressive and good and better for the country as opposed to what is not. How will we tackle it? I think for us, even in our manifesto, we spell out our view and relationship with the region. So, of course, urbanization, immigration is as a result of many different reasons. Part of it is also contributing to what is happening with our neighbors and on the continent. So we advocate for expanding on the Africa Free Trade Area Agreement to grow the economy of the continent, a stable region, transformation of international organizations like the UN, like even the AU, like even other various institutions like the IMF, World Bank, etc., to be more representative, more encompassing, and ultimately to be organizations that they were intended to be, which is creating a conducive, or yes, a conducive world order across the world. But the fact that we still have in South Africa a perception that what is black is bad and wrong and negative and not good, as opposed to what is white is good and progressive and better, is what we've also got to build through social cohesion programs to go forward.
So in terms of foreign policy, right, the DA is accused of being in lockstep with the USA. Do you see greater prospects for Gauteng if they align with the West or if they align with the global South?
We voted in the DA Congress last year to remain in BRICS, contrary to popular belief. Our perspective is a very simple one, that we will be friendly to countries that are friendly to us, but there must be some principles. Part of that principles is the respect for human rights, that it must be generally a democratic country, and that the rule of law must be found in that country. The tendency to demonize the USA and the EU, which is a strange thing, when these are our biggest trade partners, the people that have supported us throughout the years, and this moving eastward towards despots and people like that is a very surprising one. Our perspective is that it's almost a South Africa first perspective, and that we will cooperate with everyone, both East and West, but there must be principles. We will not cooperate with dictators, we will not cooperate with people that rig elections, we will not cooperate with those that trample human rights. And that is our perspective on international relations as the Democratic
You will
Alliance.
not cooperate with those who rig elections. How then do you respond to your critics who feel you very pally-pally with the US and want them to oversee our elections when they are sponsoring and funding coups on our continent?
Yeah, so there is no, if you go to global politics and we start to go deep, every country are going to point something in Russia, China, and India. The point is, historically, we have cooperated very well with some of these countries. We do not mind an extension of our cooperation to other countries. The Global South, the Chiles of the world, the Brazils of the world, we don't have a problem with that. But we're saying we should not find ourselves where we are playing off one country against the other.
Okay.
The South African interest must come first. But we must work with people with the same principles.
So, in Rise of Mzansi's opinion, what continental and international role can Gauteng as a dynamic province play?
Well, as you've correctly said, Suleiman, I mean, Gauteng is the largest economy in South Africa, third largest on the continent. and the location of most of the consulates and embassies and foreign missions. So we absolutely have an important role in fostering relations with the international community, but also in being a hub of economic trade and development on the continent. And so, as some of the speakers have spoken to, really operationalizing that African free trade, continental free trade agreement and ensuring that we're actually capacitated to export products more effectively to the African continent and vice versa. And fostering trade relations with neighboring countries. And I think another part of it, of course, is also about, this is probably more a national competence, but it's really also about, managing migration in line with our human rights, and our views on human rights as a country. So we are, we still have double the amount of inward migration than places like the Western Cape, and we must see that as a benefit. Gauteng is a hub, actually, for the African continent, and we must nurture that and find ways to ensure that we manage our migration and manage our urbanization in a way that is ultimately in line with our values of human rights, solidarity, and equality.
Ruben, tell us why Action SA's policy on foreign nationals is not morally wrong.
It can't be wrong because we have been clear in our stand. And it's so unfortunate that of late everyone just jumps on the wagon. And when we were championing many of these issues, many people were saying that we are not on the right side of the law. And we were taken to all places and we found that to be correct. That is why you find many parties are jumping on this wagon. We've been clear. We work with everyone. We want people of this world to come here. We believe Gauteng was built on the back of the migrants. And we promote tourism. We travel to other countries ourselves. We want to deal with trade. We want to, because some of these problems, like we are saying, and we demonstrated, we brought Home Affairs at the time. They were supposed to deal with the issue of immigration. They refused to deal with those matters because of this lack of proper leadership in government. So some of these things have been tested, and we work side by side. When there's a lot of good trade that we do with people of all over the world, and that's what we do. But because the government doesn't allow a proper system to be put in place to operate with other people, we need skills that come from outside. And we are the ones that advocate to have the skills list to be changed so that people with proper skills, people who do investment, they can come into this country and invest properly. But if this, that we're speaking earlier about the system that we need to put in place, and they're not being put in place, and that's what creates this problem that we're talking about. So that is why that our foreign policy is to stand the state of time, because we've been tested on it, and we've been successful, even when we're not in national government, but at a local government level.
Just before I go to the analysts, right, there's a bonus round. It shouldn't take longer than a minute because it's a yes or no answer for each one of the candidates. You got only two options, to say yes or to say no. The only third option is to say no comment. All right? And it's about Palestine. Tasneem, we know that provincial structures of parties and provincial governments can put pressure and they can make demands of national governments. Are you, as the ANC in Gauteng, going to start putting pressure on your party, and if your party is in national government, to now finally move away from all this talk about a two-state solution and not wait for the Palestinian Authority and start advocating a one-state South African solution? Yes or no?
Yes.
Thank you. Pogiso, John Steenhuisen said, one man's genocide is another man's freedom. And that was met with shock and horror by every freedom and justice-loving human in the world. Yes or no question. Is Israel guilty of genocide in Gaza?
Should
Yes or no?
Should Israel be found guilty of genocide by a competent court? Here's a one-liner opinion. Should Israel's conduct be found guilty by a competent court to be genocide,
Why didn't we wait for a
uplift
competent court to find Putin guilty before Steenhuisen made his trip to Ukraine? It was long before the ICC pronounced. So yes or no? Is Israel guilty, as per the information at our disposal, guilty of genocide in Gaza? Yes or no?
Should they be found guilty, we will say so.
We'll say no comment.
That's my answer. It's not, we're not gonna make that judgment. Should an ICJ say so, we will support it.
Okay. Vuyiswa, will Rise Mzansi accept funding from any individual or any entity that supports Israel, even if they say that that funding comes with no strings attached? In principle, will you accept money from any individual or entity that supports Israel? Yes or no?
That supports Israel or is Jewish?
That supports Israel, Zionism.
Because there are lots of Jewish people who are not
The
Zionists.
Zionist
Yes.
apartheid
Okay.
state of
Zionist.
Israel. Zionism.
Okay, so if somebody identifies as a Zionist, they would not want to fund Rise Mzansi anyway. And so most likely, no, we wouldn't have access to that money and we wouldn't accept it.
So if they give it, you won't take it.
We haven't had such offers.
But if they give it, you won't take it.
No, probably not.
Okay. Is Israel an apartheid state? Yes or no?
No comment.
Thank you for your honesty. Angela, you want to go first?
So my question to all parties, and I suppose anybody can answer, is how are you connecting your vision of an economically successful state on a continent, in a region, in a world with changing dynamics, with your policies on political international relations in relation to states, and how much of that, because in my final response, this is what I will respond to, is based on fact, research, scholarship, as opposed to slogans and incidental visits made by you or your party or its representatives to places where they were given a very specific picture of that state. So how are you going to integrate the South African economic and political shifts it is undergoing in the region and the state? Because let's be real, 114 million people are currently refugees from conflict or displaced things in the world. And if you divide that by 8 billion, that's 1 in about 100 people. And that number is going to increase as the climate catastrophe unfolds.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the policy that you imagine you will have to relate those two things? Economic success locally, but also global integration.
Anybody wants to respond to Angela?
I can go first.
Go.
Our principle, the reason why we exist as a party is under the principle of individual freedom, which for the individual, and part of that is being pro-human rights. So understanding that you would find that we do not necessarily go very hard on issues of borders and things like that. That's not our stance. Our of borders and immigration issues, you would find that
It doesn't affect the Western Cape.
it
I'm
does.
kidding, I'm kidding,
In
I'm
my
kidding,
earlier
I'm
answer,
kidding.
it did. So the point is, any human being who is displaced, who requires assistance, whether it's asylum seekers, or as a simple work permit, or as a simple study permit, or is actually just moving to get economic opportunity, will always be welcome. But it must be done in such a way that we know who is here, when and how. That's all we say. We're not going to close anyone from coming. And therefore, from a regional integration perspective, our relationship with SADC, with the AU, must remain a strong one. We, as South Africa, must become the catalyst for growth in this continent. And it gets more complex on how we relate with the rest of the world because of the tensions all over the world. And there, our position must remain strong around a pro-human rights position. It does, the additional layer of difficulty, Angelo, comes when it's who is pro-human rights where, in a conflict situation, for example.
Okay.
It becomes quite complicated, but our principle remains. We will cooperate in terms of that, and we will always support economic integration.
Okay. Anybody else wants to respond to Angela?
Yeah, I think from our side is that trade remains important, and I thought I must make this point that when Mashaba took over, one of the issues that he cut off was the issue of traveling so much, because this country's got so many problems because once we start to have a divided attention, like we all say, that we need this country to change quickly. There are programs that we put 100 days 12 months or 5 years. But we need to start really focusing in the main on these issues that are multifaceted that are affecting this country. And we get the thing right, the continent will rally around us and the province really will take its proper place, because even now, people are running away from us because of these many problems. People don't want to come and do tourism because of crime. So there's so many issues. We talk of water, we talk of electricity. So our priority should be, let's fix these problems of this country,
Okay.
and everything will fall into place.
Boiswa, you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are not an island. We operate in a global economy. We operate as part of a number of countries that form multilateral institutions, and we think South Africa should play a leading role, in protecting global peace, protecting human rights, and ensuring that there is, protection of all of human rights at a global level, because that is also what is affecting some of the challenges that Angelo raised around migration, refugees, et cetera, and particularly on the African continent. One of the things we've put in our manifesto is that we specifically want to work within the AU to strengthen the AU's capacity to deal with conflicts on the African continent. We want to be present within the various multilateral institutions, be it the sort of West aligned or the BRICS aligned, whatever you call it. It's not ours to be aligned. It's ours to ensure that we advance South Africa's national interests, we advance the continent's national interests, and we protect global peace and security.
Tasneem?
Thanks. The ANC has always understood the importance of international solidarity as it relates to any challenge that any country would have for whatever particular reason. And had it not been for, amongst others, the contribution of the international community towards supporting South Africa, apartheid would not have ended as soon as it did, had it just been us fighting it alone. So international solidarity is a key tenet of the ANC's policy. We appreciate the fact that we trade internationally. So healthy relations across the world, where we support them, where we also mediate, where we provide that type of relationship to be built, is important for us, so that trade can take place across the globe in a fair, peaceful manner, so that the peoples of the world really see prosperity across, and that notwithstanding or not at the expense of human rights, liberties that we identify both as the ANC and generally as South Africans to be what should be respected for any and every human being.
Nombanisa?
When the South African Constitution was being negotiated, the principles, starting with the principles that led to the final Constitution, a lot of things were considered, including the kind of society we want to be, including where this society is located in the history of the region. So when the Constitution, Section 27 of the Constitution, provides healthcare, access to healthcare for everybody, and it doesn't say documented or undocumented, it's not accidental. It's based on the protection of humanity. Even prisoners have to be protected in terms of their humanity. So, to Action South Africa, I wonder if you would want to consider one day that your insistence on illegal immigrants actually feeds, if that's not your intention, even if you say it's not your intention, but it actually feeds into violent ethno-nationalism, especially at this time where in the whole world there is conservative uprising. You see in El Salvador, for example, you see in so-called Francophonia, where coups have come at a time when we thought we were done with coups. And at the core of this is violent nationalism. So I
Yeah.
wonder if you would want to listen to people who caution that illegal immigrant, your stance on illegal immigrants is a dog whistle. It gives people an impression that immigrants are for fair and everybody can just kill them if they want to.
Ruben?
Yeah, that is why I said earlier that some of this position that we have taken have been tested. And it's clearly, even those that are here in this country, they've come up to say that we want to work with you because we understand why we are. We are being exploited because we come to this country, we follow the processes, but the government of the day that's supposed to assist us doesn't assist us. So it then, the circumstances of that makes to what you are saying, because if the systems that must protect whether you are a legal foreigner or you are illegal foreigner doesn't operate properly, even you haven't even spoken anything about your South African people that are not protected at all. The system currently doesn't fail to even protect illegal and legal foreigners.
Excuse me, I need to say this. I'm saying to you, the Constitution doesn't say, for example, illegal foreigners will have health care. Section 27, it says everybody who's here in the borders of South Africa. And the question I'm asking is very simple. Could it be possible that your insistence on illegal immigrants is misunderstood or is understood to be open season to attack immigrants? Because actually, when you keep talking about things that have been tested, there are institutions that have done research for 30 years in this country. You can start here at VETS, the Center for Migration. We've done research, and what research has shown persistently is that continuing to highlight illegal immigrants is read as a message that says foreigners are not wanted. So could it be possible, are you open to that your insistence on this puts people's lives at risk?
Ruben?
Look, for us, anything that is pro-rule of law, that's what we stand for. So we will not promote anything that says otherwise. And that is why I give reference, because it will be a misnomer to take it in an abstract. These issues that are being raised have been raised before, and they've been found in our contest. That is why we are being told now that we have moved away from our stand, when we've been saying the same, because it's not us that have said certain things that are inflammatory, not us. We've been consistent, and because of our consistency, both illegal and legal foreigners in this land, they've come to us for assistance because they want the system to work for them. So it doesn't apply in our position there to stand. So even if we want to consider, it will not solve the problem that we are currently. So the problem has to be solved so that that thing doesn't arise in this context that we address this matter of immigration.
I'm covered, exactly.
Covered. Okay.
Can I just
Sure.
indicate the terms are documented and undocumented migrants. There are no such things as illegal people.
Exactly.
Okay, before we ask the party representatives for the closing remarks, we know this has been a program primarily for the online audience, both on the radio as well as TV and then live streaming. But from those who are present here this evening, is there anyone who would like to ask a question or make a quick comment? You could come to the front, sir. Maybe just stand next to Tasneem so the cameras can pick you up. Anybody else?
Thank you.
If you could just, once you come there, introduce yourself and try and be as succinct as possible. If there's anybody else, please just come to the front.
First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Just hold the mic closer to you.
Must I
And
stand over here?
you just come to the, right next.
Over here? Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity. I've been listening to what has been discussed here tonight. Very interesting. I've analyzed and I've seen that this has been a peaceful gathering over here. There's no shouting, there's no swearing, there's no fighting. We've got major problems in our country. Yes, we do. One of the many problems, and I don't understand why the government They keep on saying that we don't have this, we don't have that.
Just hold the
We,
mic closer.
we sent recently 2,900 troops to the DRC. From here to Kinshasa by plane takes you roughly 4 hours. We've got roughly 1,500 troops operating in Mozambique. What about the crime that we've got in this country? With those 2.9 and 1.5 together, if they would be put into the areas where we've got major problems, and the Western Cape, it has also got major problems when it comes to crime. How about giving priority to the citizens of this country and not so much paying attention to what is happening elsewhere in Africa?
Okay.
The infrastructures that we've got in this country, compared to the rest of Africa, out of the 54 countries in Africa,
One is to reduce poverty. We are a party that is advocating for an expansion of the social safety net, the increase of grants to the poverty line, the increase of foods.
Of policies, because sometimes we might want to go into government as if we're going to start afresh or learn, but we're going to go and run because we've got a set of policies that have been approved, and these policies have been worked with with everyone, experts, and they are practical policies that we are ready to deliver on. So as you go to this election, please let's not continue with the old. We have to really start with practical and focus on what we need to do. We're a party that respects the rule of law. We have demonstrated that in many times. We're a party that want to push economic prosperity, because unless we get the basics right, create jobs, build our infrastructure, this country will not go anywhere.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Do our panelists want to make analysts any final remarks? Are you good?
So mine is not to tell people how to vote or who to vote for. That is what analysis allows for. But I want the listeners and the viewers to listen to the politicians, and not listen only for what you want to hear or for what you think you already know, but to measure what you were told by politicians against the facts and the records and the laws and the policies that are available to all of us, because they're made public. Because it is in comparing what politicians say they've done against what they've done, or what they promise to do against what is allowable to do, that is where an informed vote really comes from. And yes, politicians have to make those promises, but it is us as voters who have a duty to measure those promises up against reality. Thank you.
Melissa, you want to say anything?
Well, just to say, to add to what Angelo said, that everything that will feature in the platforms of political parties, in their manifestos, measure it against your own lived reality.
I just want to acknowledge this moment and the fact that we have differing political parties sitting on one stage and we're able to have this discussion with a robust freedom of the media is something we should never take for granted. This democracy is something that was really hard fought for, and we must never forget that, because opportunities like these don't exist in some of the most advanced democracies in the world, some of the largest democracies of the world. And so the opportunity that we can sit here and say completely divergent views and at the same time respect one another is something that we should never take for granted. And I think to the listeners and to the viewers to say that election day is important because the price of it was much higher than anything else. And we must not forget that when we have discourse like this. Thank you.
Well, let me conclude by thanking all the participants, the political party representatives and our analysts for the very frank, robust, but mature discussion that was held with a great degree of decorum. And I think we've showed South Africans tonight that this is not parliament. And I know that at times in these kind of discussions, things can get a bit out of hand. So that's why I want to thank you and thank the very specific individuals that we invited here and all of our listeners and our viewers for tuning in this evening. I have to make a special mention of Mohammed Kaji, the Executive Director of ASTRI, and his entire team for the role that they've played in helping us put together not only this program tonight, but even the programs prior to this, and for the great work that they continue to do, uplifting society. Let me also acknowledge my good friend Shiraz for allowing us the use of his premises and for providing the refreshments here tonight. To all the media houses, to Radio Lansar out in Durban, shukran for being part of the program, Hilal TV, as well as INX Prime, and to all of the staff members of Radio Islam as well who have been putting in quite a few hours here to make all of this possible. Shukran to all of you, and let us wish all of the parties here and the other parties all the best, and let us continue to pray for the best possible outcome in this election for all South